We are live, Your Worship.
Good afternoon, Council. I'd like to call a special council meeting of June 16th, 2026 to order. We have a couple of things we'd like to just bring in before we adopt the agenda. Mr. Parliament, you have an announcement?
Yes, so Mayor and Council, I'd like to introduce, if you can come forward, Carly, outside the screen there. This is Carly Precision, who has started as our new Director of Community Economic Development. She started yesterday. She had a full day with staff and visiting various facilities throughout the community. And today we had a quick little lunch with the CED team, and we thought it was probably best to introduce Carly today rather than wait a week, because you probably would have heard on the street that we have a new staffer. So we welcome Carly to the team. Most of you have met her. She comes from Sicamous, who worked for the Development Corporation there for the last 6 years, and prior to that was in the private sector, working for Red Bull and TKS, our friend Carl Klooster, and she's excited to be here. So on behalf of everyone, welcome, Carly.
Thank you, guys. Happy to be here.
Carly, thank you. Appreciate you joining our team. I had the opportunity to get cornered by Carly and some of the staff out on the street yesterday. So welcome. This past week, had a dear friend and our colleague, Vice Chair Kevin Flynn, passed away June 11th. He had been diagnosed with cancer a short 7 weeks prior to his death. And I just want to honor Kevin by saying he was a friend to every politician, a mentor to many, and an esteemed colleague of all of those in Salmon Arm, the city of Salmon Arm, as a councillor for many years, board chair on CSRD, vice chair on CSRD, and member of CSRD for many years. Involved in the insurance industry during his working career, and definitely made a significant impact on everyone in Salmon Arm, and even here in Revelstoke through his work with the CSRD. So I just wanted to take this moment to acknowledge his life, his love for people, his love for his family, and his love for community. So thank you for everything, Kevin, that you've given to all of us, and wish you nothing but good journeys. All right, Council, I'd like to adopt the agenda. If someone want to make that motion for me, please. Councillor Devlin, seconded by Councillor Cherry. All in favor? Motion's carried. We're going to go right into staff reports. Pardon me.
Council has received numerous correspondence that's not listed in the agenda, and I'm just wondering if we can make a motion to include that in the meeting minutes. If that would be.
Yeah, we can add that, and it'll come. She'll revise the agenda and put that in there.
Great, thank you.
All right.
So probably should do it formally. I'll second.
Okay, so moved, Ms. Delassalle moved by Councillor Stapleton, second by Councillor Palmer. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to staff reports, short-term rental project. We deferred this from April 28th. So just a very brief overview, please, Mr. Simon, and we can get right into the debate, the conversations. We've seen this come to us a few times now.
Thank you to Your Worship, through Your Worship, all of Council. This report, as Mayor indicated, was deferred from April 28th, which was the conclusion of the short-term rental project, culminating with a recommendation from staff with respect to how to proceed. Staff have been working on this really predominantly since February 2025. Completed numerous rounds of public engagement, and ultimately crafted a report with recommendation for council, 4 options for you to consider. Staff are happy to answer any questions that council may have as follow-up from April 20th.
Great, thank you, Mr. Simon. So council, first off, any questions for Mr. Simon prior to getting into the conversation? Councillor Stegner.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. Just for clarification, option 4 was never an option that was presented to the general public through the consultation period. Is that correct?
Through your worship, Councillor Stapenhurst, that is correct. Option 4 came about as a result of the feedback that the public provided throughout the public engagement process.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, and let's start the conversation. So you have a recommended motion here. Does anyone want to discuss any part of that regarding amendments to the business bylaw, municipal ticket information bylaw, bylaw offense notice, council policy, future consideration in accordance with option 4? Or do you have other comments that you wish to go to? Councillor Statement.
I'm willing to make a motion, but it won't be supporting option 4.
Councillor, you want to have a discussion? Bring it up.
Okay, I move that the amendment to zoning bylaw number 2406, business bylaw number 501503, municipal ticket information bylaw 2082, bylaw offense notice bylaw number 2370, and council policy DS23 be prepared for future council considerations in accordance with the policy option number 1 as detailed in the staff report dated April 28th, 2026. And that the draft bylaws and amended council policy DS26 be posted on Talks, Revelstoke, and circulated to the short-term rental mailing list and the public in advance of future council consideration. And that staff report on proposed monitoring metrics, including long-term rental availability, rental affordability, vacancy rates, and short-term rental activity to enable evidence-based evaluation of any future amendments. And that staff provide the evidentiary basis and comparative analysis supporting any proposed lot size, parking, and zoning restrictions contained within the draft amendments.
I was seconder for that motion. Councillor Lucille. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Stapenhurst, I'll start with you.
Yes, sir. So I think given the feedback from the public, I think it's clear that the public was in favor of option 1. I believe it was over 30% in favor of that. I think that the option 4, while it references housing needs and demands, we don't have any data that we're currently collecting on that. So it's anecdotal information that we're basing the decision off of for housing. Having said that, I'm willing to hear what the opinions of others on the motion presented.
Councillor Lucille, you seconded the motion. Do you have any comment at this point?
Thank you, Mayor Souls. Kind of in line with Councillor Stapenhurst, it seems that the public is wanting the option for the expansions of short-term rentals around the community, and I think it would be within the best interest of the community to go in that direction, but willing to hear what other councillors, how they feel about this.
Okay. Anyone else want to weigh in? Councillor Devlin?
Yeah, I don't know if I could disagree more with those statements. I have seen through this entire engagement process, what we have seen from the community, or at least what I've personally seen, is essentially a consideration that this is a waste of time. I've seen, which I don't agree with, just to be clear, I don't think it was a waste of time. I think this was a very useful exercise, but I've seen zero support for expanding widely throughout the city short-term rentals. We have received conversations from our largest partners in tourism, the chair of which board has been involved in the short-term rental expansion in Revelstoke since its inception, essentially, and they do not support option 1. They support option 4. We're being told from staff through all the working that's being done that the stakeholders engaged and said, why are we changing it? We have heard from this from the public. We have heard this from every major stakeholder in this process. And I also would counter the idea that because we don't have data, we should rapidly change. I think if you're going to talk about a data-driven approach, changing things is what you do after you get the data, not before, and then asking for the data to come after you've made wild sweeping changes. We've heard anecdotally that there is some movement in the market, that maybe there's some vacancy in this shoulder season that we're currently in. That's an anecdotal statement, and it's also, that was the point. That's what we said we were all focusing on 4 years ago when we stood in an all candidates forum and said we were going to work to address the housing issues in Revelstoke. If there's vacancy now, if there's movement in the market, which I have not seen any particular evidence of, that was the point. Why would we now backstep on that? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and it isn't really where I personally, it isn't what I signed up to do, so to speak. We were signing up to help the housing market, so I think instead of focusing on the public potentially requiring mortgage helpers, I think it would be better to focus on getting the housing situation in Revelstoke to a place where people don't require mortgage helpers. I think that is the goal, is to up vacancy and to make sure that people don't have to live 4 people per room in a house, that we don't need 16 cars in a 4-bedroom house anymore because people are crammed into a place because this is just an unaffordable town. I don't see that getting any better, and I see if we go down the road of option number 1, that's only going to get worse.
Councillor Lennon?
Thank you, Mayor Souls. I'm wondering if it's possible, since the resolution, much of it is new, if it's possible to see it on the screen.
Ms. Delasal, could you share that resolution on your screen?
If Councillor Stabenhorst can share it with me, it was new to me as well, and I'm sorry I could not catch it. It was quite long.
I will work on sending that over to.
Well, that's happy. Do you mind if I jump in with some questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
Appreciate that. If I can, through the chair to Mr. Simon, has the city engaged any conversations with the Mountain Development Group, the province, or RMR about these potential changes?
Mr. Simon, do you have a comment?
Through your worship, Councillor Cherry, so the Mountain Resorts branch
Thank
is
you.
not a formal stakeholder that would be consulted. We've had general conversations with representatives from the resort, and their feedback would be received and considered the same as any member of the public would be provided for this particular issue.
Okay.
From staff's perspective, that is.
Without looking at that, what they have might be more important than any sort of public engagement we've had. I do think that their agreement with the province may be at risk, or council could be at risk by making these sweeping changes without having an in-depth conversation. Personally, if you want to weigh in on that, I don't know if you feel the same way or not.
Through your worship to all of council, rather, the discussions with the resort around city changes to short-term rental allowances, their area, their development entitlements are protected by the province regardless of what tweaks and changes council wants to make to the overall STR framework. For them, it really just changes, and I don't like speaking for them, I don't want to, but we have had the conversation at this level, so I'm comfortable at this level. It just changes investment decisions because it all comes down to how many units of accommodation are available in town, how does that relate to amount of skiers and riders that can go to the hill at any given time, how does that relate to their on-mountain infrastructure? So if the city was to crack down, for example, on short-term rentals and say we're going to cut it all out of the rest of town, peel back all these historic allowances, that just might have them invest more heavily in short-term rental accommodation on mountain so that they can build up the accommodation that's required to support tourism.
Okay.
And alternatively, if we expanded short-term rental, it might change their investment decisions for how much accommodation they would like to build out. So based on market conditions.
Again, it's their investment decisions are one thing, but their entitlements around and on the resort lands with short-term rentals, based on the on-site infrastructure that they do put in, a few $100 million in the last couple of years, just with the golf course and what's happening with the hotel at the bottom, and the as well as any future upgrades with lift expansion. I wouldn't be prepared to put that at risk, or this group or this agreement at risk, without having consultation with both them and the Mountain Resorts group, the province, personally.
And through your worship, just to be clear, again, it does not, they have their entitlements, they're entrenched in zoning, they're entrenched in their master development agreement for how many bed units they can build out. So that does not change. That's all entrenched in their comprehensive development zone. So all it really does is it just changes, how we choose to regulate short-term rental at the city level. It changes their decisions for when and how much they're going to build based on what the market can absorb within Revelstoke.
Okay, then just a comment for council here. It might be a little bit lengthy, but ultimately I feel that this conversation comes down to what lens or what lenses we take a look at this from. Do we look at it as a focus on supporting, long-term housing, long-term rentals, Do we look at it with a focus on supporting local or local ownerships being able to participate in the tourism economy, short-term rental market? Do we protect our local accommodators and hoteliers that are paying commercial rates versus STRs that won't be? You know, what is the negative effect of that? I know we have an economics report here, but you know, what lenses is this group or are this group going to focus on? Is kind of where we have to come at this at the table. Happy to continue the debate and give everybody else the floor, but I'm gonna save my comments to the end, how I feel like voting.
And Mr. LaSalle, can you make it just a little larger, please? Larger. There we go. I think, can you all see that now?
And could we have it emailed to us as well?
Sure. You got a moment, Mr. LaSalle? Can you email that to all of council?
Certainly.
So while you're reading through, Councilor Stabenhurst, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
At the end of the last paragraph, staff provide evidentiary basis and comparative analysis supporting any proposed lot size, parking, zoning restrictions. I'm not exactly sure what you're asking for there, but I'm just going to go to Mr. Simon. Does that make sense to you? Is there some sort of evidentiary basis that you could put an analysis together regarding that, or is that very clear to you?
Through your worship, with respect to the lot size, the staff report from April 28th details that the average lot size for low density lots in the city is 1,079 square meters, which includes several very large lots. When you get rid of those, we're getting a little bit further down. We have several lots that are 500 square meters in size, or several hundred lots rather. And our experience in seeing those come through, they typically build out to the maximum of their lot potential with meeting, 1.5 meter setbacks, building as big as they can on the lot. So 750 was intended as kind of a middle ground where, based on the feedback we heard from the public, where if we're going to allow short-term rentals, it should be on a lot that's large enough to accommodate parking, as well as on a lot that is not overbuilt to the point, I don't want to say overbuilt, but built to the maximums of what the bylaw allows for, which we really see people building up to those maximums at that 500 square meter range. Once you start going larger than that, you start to see houses on a lot that's a little bit larger that can accommodate the use intended. That's why we got that 750. If council wants us to do a more thorough analysis beyond what is included in the staff report, I'd be requesting additional confirmation and information as to what the intent of that is. Is that to reevaluate the 750 square meter lot or to remove it entirely? And then the parking, because parking is always such a hot button topic within this community, staff weren't recommending any changes beyond the minimum parking allowances right now. And I will note, Mr. Gyps can confirm this as well. The vast majority of complaints that we do receive about short-term rentals is related to parking. Noise is also one, but parking is a big one. So staff would not be recommending any changes to the minimum parking allowances. If council wants to direct changes, then that would be at their prerogative.
Okay, all right. Any other comments on the motion, Councillor Devlin? And then at some point, I'm going to weigh in if everybody else has a chance to.
Absolutely. Sorry, I just wanted to come back with some information. I want to make sure I had the numbers right. There's a reference in the original conversation to the survey that we did to the public, where it was stated that 30% were in favor of changing. The survey I'm seeing has 20% that say we do not have enough short-term rentals and need more, whereas 35% say we have too many and should remove some, and 13% said we have enough and should not allow any more. And I just, if we're going to reference data, I just want to make sure that the correct data is out there.
Great. So Councillor Stabenhurst, I'll come back to you about your last paragraph in your motion. Do you have any comment on that?
In regards to lot size, I was just looking to make it more equitable for all of the property owners in Revelstoke. Hearing Director Simon's comments, I'm not sure how we can make it more equitable. Yeah, it would have to be at a further discussion. I don't know if right now, if we're getting into the weeds on a policy, yeah, I'm not exactly entirely sure how to proceed at this point. In regards to lot size, I would say maybe potentially revisit it, look at maybe 500 square feet. I'm not sure what the average lot size is in Revelstoke, but how can we make people feel like they have more of an option to participate in the tourism economy?
So, I just want to weigh in on a few notes that I have. So I'm concerned about the unintended consequences as we move forward here. So what is the risk? The risk would be, do we have enough rental accommodation? I don't think we know that at this point. And how do we quantify change? How do we basically say this is for the better of the community when there seems to be, in my mind anyway, polar opposites dealing with that? There's complicated economic questions that I don't think we know and probably would never know, decision made or no decision made. Councillor Devlin weighed in, this process was not a waste of time. I agree, it wasn't a waste of time. It got us to where we are. The consultants weighed in with the community. It was a pretty good engagement process. And the staff have consistently followed council policy. So when we look at all of those things, to be quite honest, I'm not supportive of option 1. I think option 4 is the best because I don't think we have quantified what our long-term plan is with housing or that we have enough housing. I know that I can look in my neighborhood at the local bed and breakfasts that are in my neighborhood, and they're not always booked. So if they were always booked and we were screaming for more because there's nowhere for people to see, I can understand this. But I think that some of the comments that we're getting from the public are people who want to join in. When I hear things about I need a mortgage helper, how do people get a mortgage in the first place? You can't go to your bank and say, I want a mortgage, but I need a short-term rental to pay it down. I don't think you're going to get the lending. So I'm a little concerned about that. We can look at the town of Canmore. Across the board, rents have gone up, even in the commercial sector. I had a friend who had an identical business to mine. He couldn't afford to build, so he had to rent in a strip mall. And the amount of money he paid per month for his rental for his business was astronomical. So I'm concerned about those unintended consequences as we move forward. And I just wanted to voice this now. So we'll go around the table. If anyone else has more comments to make, then now's the time before I call a question on a motion.
I think Councillor Lander.
Councillor Lander.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just trying to think on my feet here. I hadn't seen this resolution prior to the meeting, so I'm trying to review what is actually proposed and understand it. I'm just had a question, for example, regarding DS23, for example. So amendments to Council Policy DS23 as recommended in the original staff recommendation were intended, let me just see if I can recall this, to outline what our future policy would be regarding the provincial framework for STR. I think that was the main substance of why we would be amending that policy. There may be other things in there. And I'm wondering if the idea here is that that would be included, because I don't think those statements were necessarily connected to option 1, 2, or 3, that was specifically Council 4 thing. So for my understanding, just based off the floor, what changes would is staff comfortable based on what is proposed here to make those changes? They have enough direction? Do they know what they would be?
So Councillor Stapehurst, I'll ask you first because you made the motion. Do you have an answer to that? Do you want to weigh in, or do you want me to go right to Mr. Simon?
I think Director Simon's probably better answer better suited to answer that question. Happy to weigh in afterwards.
Through your worship to Councillor Orlando, regardless of which option council directs us for, we will be proceeding with and recommending updates to all bylaws and policies as applicable related to short-term rental. So that DS policy will certainly need an update to not only reflect the decision that was made by council, give direction on what the city's position is with respect to the opt-in, opt-out ability under Bill 35 of the Short-Term Rental Accommodation Act. And one of the key things that staff want to see in there as well to ensure transparency and clarity for the public is if you are an operator, you don't want these rules up for debate every 2 years. We want to outline generally what the accepted process would be up to council's approval as to what the city would be considering for any future update, just to ensure that there is clarity in the process we would go through and that it's not going to be an ad hoc change that would be kind of, shoehorned in. Give some clarity for operators and members of the public.
Councillor Orlando, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Lucille and Councillor Palmer.
Thanks, Marsols. Regarding your comments around mortgage helpers, what we see in the community is a baby boom. We have families that are having kids. We have daycare that's lacking. So houses that have two incomes to offset their mortgage payments might not be able to have both parents return to work. So I think having the opportunity for these families to have a mortgage helper in that sense will be able to keep families within our community.
Great, appreciate that input. Thank you. Councillor Palmer, please.
Thank you, Mayor Souls. And I'll speak to the motion as written. Well, what a surprise. We got controversy around short-term rentals. What a surprise in differing thoughts. So I would just like to acknowledge a couple things. One, the work that staff has done on this, the consultation that we went through. And I'd especially like to recognize the contributions the community has made. And there's diversity of thought out there. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that. Option one is a very valid option. And that's why we're considering it. Probably the one that's for the next resolution, possibly. Speaking to this motion, I think there's some very, very valid points. I also concur with Councillor Lucio about concepts about affordability, mortgage helpers, and those kind of ideas. So to me, it's not the thing that breaks it, because I think there's some valid argument in that. And I think people have expressed that. And I would like to see us work in the future on how multiple ways of making Revelstoke more affordable, especially for young people trying to get into the housing market. Speaking to the motion, so there's some reason for that. The motion as it's written right now, the second and third, and that statements seem to be more supportive of option 4. Because it's saying more data. So there is I think that's been pointed out already, a little bit of a contradiction. Very valid points though, that have we really considered all the implications as we move ahead? There's a part of me that on free market, having people make their own choices philosophically, there's a sense that I have on option 1 that I like a lot of that. Having said that, the problem is this continues. We just heard from the planner about what we don't want to do is come back every 2 years. The last 8 years, the last 12 years, we keep on coming back over every 2 years because we don't quite get it right, or we actually make some mistakes. And then try and fix them after the fact. So there's those aspects in the question mark contained within this resolution is tending to make me more supportive of option 4 just on the basis of that. And so to summarize, option one, I think has some very strong merits behind it. However, in balance of a multitude of things, I will not support moving ahead with option one at this point. So I will be opposed to this motion as it stands. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cherry and Councillor Orlando.
Thanks. Just gotta correct what I feel like might be some inaccuracies from your previous statement, as well as Councillor Lucio's not attacking you guys at all, just working with financiers a lot. Anecdotally, you are able to use potential income from an SDR for a mortgage qualification. It is taken at a much lesser rate than if you were to, in my experience, than if you were to do a long-term rental. Long-term rental will give you 100% of that income at minus 5% for occupancy. Whereas a short-term, it's significantly different, and every lender has its own rules, whether you go private, whether you go top 5. Just something to consider. But ultimately, for me, this is coming down to what lens do I apply and looking at the options in front of me. And I'm currently, although I do, out of the 3 options that were proposed originally, option 1 was the only one I felt was suited out of those 3. You know, at this time now, and after consulting with much of the general public and going through all the raw data in the comments, I will be leaning to option 4.
So I want to respond to your comment. Thank you for clarification. You don't offend me when you clarify those things. I'm appreciative of that. When you have the knowledge, I appreciate the fact that you're sharing that with council. Not offensive? Yeah.
Okay, this time. Yeah.
Any other comments? Oh, Councillor Orlando, sorry, you had your hand up. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Stills. I'm not going to support the resolution on the floor. And my rationale is that, we've just engaged in a long process, year and a half, 2 years, to gather input from all stakeholders who are interested in participating in the report, participating in the process. And at the end of that, although I think it was probably challenging for staff to present option 4, what they found through this participation process was not a clear preference for one thing. And another reason why is that at the last meeting, I moved to defer it to this meeting just to give everyone a little bit more time to talk about, gain understanding, talk to stakeholders, mull it over and everything. And I guess the challenge I had is that this is presented at the meeting, right here. It's fairly long and worded, and it's sort of a bit of a surprise. And what ends up happening is when these are put on the floor right at the start, which is you can do that, that's fine, is that the discussion of the policy in front of us and the ways forward sort of is through the lens of, okay, now we're debating this thing. I don't think we really had an opportunity, at least at this meeting, after everyone had a chance to consult with stakeholders on their own, council members. I don't think we really had an opportunity to, see this, understand this, and I think it's would have been better to be able to think through this. And right now, I don't think I can support what is on the floor here. I'm happy to continue discussion as we go through this at the meeting today, including if people want to present options for different from what is recommended from staff. But to have the entire conversation based on this one sort of last minute resolution is challenging for me, especially since this is specifically a process that seeks to reach out to the public and gather their views, which we found are have many different perspectives, often not in agreement with each other. So as a result, I don't support this resolution.
Okay, appreciate comments. Councillor Stevens.
Yeah, thank you. Just a few things to clarify. I know Councillor Devlin mentioned the letter and the input from Tourism Rebel. So I just want to clarify that at the AGM, there was a little bit of conflicting information. We received a letter from the Revelstoke Accommodation Association, who ultimately were in support of policy number 4 or option 4. However, at the AGM, where Councillor Palmer and I were both present, In the visitor survey, one of the things that were mentioned from the visitors is a lack of affordable accommodations associations. We've seen accommodations such as the Cube, such as the hostel, and such as Journey's Perch. All of those no longer offer accommodation on a nightly basis. And I think that is reflected in the visitor survey. Moving forward with the motion that's that I introduced today, essentially what I was looking to do was to direct staff to prepare the bylaws, let the public see them. We could kind of measure the outcomes and then unpack the restrictions moving forward. I'm not looking to make a policy here today. I think it's still within staff to craft something based on the conversations here today, but more than happy to call the questions and we can move forward.
Thank you, Mayor Schultz. I would just like to clarify also Councillor Stapenhurst's motion is not last minute in the sense that there is a recommendation for number 4. The first 2 parts of Councillor Stapenhurst's resolution are essentially the same, other than going with option 1, which is one of the, option 1 that's in the report. So I just want to clarify that it's not a surprise motion. The qualifiers, part 2 and 3, part 3 and 4 of that motion, possibly even apply to number 4. So I'd just like to provide that clarification.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that the key thing when we're making decisions regarding housing, we're not like committee of the whole, and I think it was May 19th, Development Services said, we're not tracking vacancies, we're not tracking affordability, and there was another metric that we're not tracking. So how we have housing goals, how do we know we're reaching them? What are we doing to incentivize the development of housing in our community?
Any comment, Mr. Simon, on that statement?
Through your worship, I could certainly go over an incredibly long list of work that this council has completed over the last 4 years with respect to housing, providing certainty, making sure developers are contributing appropriately for infrastructure and that there's certainty in the cost, zoning bylaw amendments, development approval procedure bylaws, application forms and guides. There's been a whole bunch of work done, and I think it's important. I can provide some context for council as well with respect to the housing situation. The comments related to the last committee of the whole meeting regarding tracking rental rates, vacancy data. If you guys can point us to a community sub 10,000 that consistently and reliably tracks vacancy data, we will be ecstatic if they can share with us their magic that actually makes it work. Tracking vacancy data at a provincial scale comes with a whole lot of caveats associated with it. We will never get perfectly representative data within Revelstoke, especially because we're a resort municipality. There are so many variables that will be impossible to track and to consider effectively. But one thing that we can generally quantify is what our anticipated housing demand is going to be going forward and how much housing we have constructed to meet that demand. And so I can give you guys some numbers. Since 2021, we are very keen to see the census data released later this year. We had about 3,700 dwelling units in the city in 2021. We're around 4,200 now. So by our count, our own occupancy data that we do track internally at the city, we've added about 524 dwelling units to the city. You take away some of the big developments that we've had, namely Mackenzie Village with additional short-term rental. If you take the short-term rentals out of that, we've had 301 extra dwelling units added to the city for long-term housing purposes. We have housing needs reports that identify how much housing we need by 2041. So based on 2021, 20 years out. This gives us a really good snapshot. So you can think of it as the OCP said we needed to build 1,219 units by 2041 to meet our housing needs in this community. The most recent 2024 housing needs and demands report that was completed said we need 2,300 housing units to meet what the province would consider a healthy housing market in our community. Now that 2,300, bit of caveat, has a big demand buffer in there. Without getting into the details, consider it about 1,600. We've built 300 units in 5 years, and we've been building a lot in Revelstoke. If we keep up this pace until 2041, we will just barely hit what the original OCP target of 1,219 units was. We would be 15 units short. That's if we keep up this pace of construction over the next 15 years, which we do not anticipate Revelstoke and the local economy being able to sustain this pace of construction over the next 20 years, or next 15 years rather. It has been moving fast and likely due to the fact that there has been some pent up demand in the market in Revelstoke, because between 2016 and 2021, we didn't have a huge increase in housing stock within Revelstoke. Between 2021 and 2026, we have had this big increase, but we need to keep that up to meet our housing demands. So every little bit does help. Is short-term rental going to be the silver bullet? Of course not. But if we make changes to the short-term rental policy, you can anticipate that there will be people displaced. At that macro level, is it going to be significant enough to counter the positive efforts that we've made on housing? Hard to say, hard to quantify. A lot of it comes down to individual owner preference, how they want to use their properties and how they choose to going forward. It's a very challenging thing to quantify, but we can quantify our anticipated housing demand as well as how much we have built. And I can tell you, if we keep up with this pace, we will just meet our original OCP target.
Great, appreciate that input. Follow up, Councillor Stiveners?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to hear the numbers. It's a little bit, it's a little bit overwhelming, the amount of information. And then once you dive into it, you're like, all right, cool. So how many of those newly constructed units in the last 5-10 years have been Mackenzie Village?
223 out of 524.
So over half, or roughly.
Yeah, so 301 were long-term and 224 or 223 were short-term roughly.
And then I think, I mean, option 4, that's not really going to move the needle that much on housing, is it?
Through your worship to Councillor Stapenhurst, what option 4 does is not only from staff's perspective, and again, just to make it abundantly clear, I'm not here to debate the options. I'm here to give objective information to council, and we will follow whatever direction council gives, and we will follow it appropriately. But from staff's perspective, what option 4 does is it maintains the certainty that's been established in the community now with respect to what the city's rules are for short-term rental. And this council has been has excelled in enforcing and consistently applying our existing policy to give certainty. We don't have people coming and knocking at the door saying, I want to build 200 units of short-term rental accommodation in the city. They understand that the city's framework is established and that deviations from that existing framework will be unlikely met with support. So it does that. And option 4 also ensures that while it would be more anecdotal, what our most affordable accommodation is in the community is potentially short-term rental or secondary suites and accessory dwelling units, that is maintained for long-term rental within the community. That's what it does. So is it necessarily going to incentivize people to build long-term rental? You know, if you can't use a secondary suite for short-term rental, maybe someone won't build it. But again, we still are seeing them come in. They're used for long-term rental. They're an affordable form of accommodation within the community that at this time, staff do not feel that it is appropriate to allow the door to open to transition those to short-term rental.
Great, appreciate that. All right, any other comments on the motion on the table? I will call the question on the motion on the table. Councillor Cherry, is something you want to weigh in?
I'm gonna allow you to sit on it.
All right. So, the motion on the table is option 1 with some deviation. I will call a question. All those in favor? Note Councillor opposed. Balance of council opposes. This motion is defeated. In favor was Councillor Lusat and Councillor Stapenhurst. Balance of council were in opposition. For the record, Ms. Delosa. So, is there anyone else that wants to? Councillor Devlin?
I will move that amendments to business license bylaw number 1503, municipal ticket information bylaw number 2082, bylaw offense notice bylaw number 2370, and council policy DS-23 be prepared for future council consideration in accordance with policy option number 4 as detailed in staff report from April 28, 2026, and that staff post amended bylaws and council policy DS-23 on tap Revelstoke and inform the community in advance of subsequent council consideration via the short-term rental mailing list of subscribers. I will leave it there, although I do see some merit in the third part of Councillor Stapenhurst's previous motion. I would rather do that as a separate thing if we're going to go down that.
Okay. Second for that motion, please. Councillor Cherry,
I'll second it.
discussion on the motion.
Yeah, just curious if staff wants to come back and do this all over again in 2 years. We put a caveat in here for that.
I
Just
think
keep
that's-
things consistent.
Yeah. I think that's a given. I mean, we would plan it that way. Maybe 3 years, because we'll probably need a new election.
A little fun.
What's that?
Gotta have a little bit of fun.
Okay, that's fine. Councilor Palmer, you want to?
Just trying to discern whether there was serious elements or not, but okay, thank you.
All right, any discussion on the motion that's on the table? Councilor Devon.
I mean, nothing particularly new to add. I mean, it is what's recommended in the report, so it seems like the next step to discuss. If there's any further discussion on it, absolutely, but currently, yes, that's where we sit.
Any other, Councilor Chair?
Yeah, just have a clarification through staff. Does this merge the short-term rental definition and the bed and breakfast definition?
Through your worship, Councillor Cherry, no, it does not. So this would not include any amendments to the zoning bylaw. It would strictly be the business license bylaw, the municipal certificate of information bylaw, and the bylaw offense notice bylaw, along with council policy. And the main changes here would be with respect to advertising, minimum number of parking spaces, which is a big item that we heard from the community, that parking is an issue with short-term rentals when we did our engagement, as well as give direction for staff to implement a 3-strike rule, which was another piece that we had heard from the community.
Okay, and I just have a quick follow-up question. And again, this is just for clarification. It's not written here. Under our current or this new, any changes, our lockout suites with kitchenettes, are those able to be used as bed and breakfasts?
Through your worship to Councillor Cherry, it is fully dependent as to whether or not the lockout suite meets the definition of a dwelling unit under the zoning bylaw. So the big difference with a bed and breakfast and short-term rental, bed and breakfast needs to include the occupants within the primary dwelling. Whether or not that private space within the private dwelling, whether it's a lock-off suite or a basement, constitutes its own dwelling unit, is very much based on the individual characteristics of how that individual is proposing to build it. One of the things that we say to proponents, just for clarity for everyone, what are you trying to accomplish? And don't try and make the bylaws fit to your proposal. You have to make your proposal fit to the bylaws. And we get it a lot where people come in and try and do the former and make the bylaws fit to their proposal. And it is always a much more cumbersome process for them to go through, with building inspectors going out and inspecting the premises and seeing what electrical hookups and oven hookups and all that stuff. So a lockout suite, depending on how it is designed, could potentially qualify under a bed and breakfast, but if it meets the definition of a dwelling unit, then it would not, and it would be considered a second short-term rental.
Okay, and then for clarification of the bylaws and having these conversations and the staff time it takes to continually go over this with applicants, do you have anything additionally you'd like to see done at this time to help staff?
Well, you prepared for the list?
That's a very thoughtful
With
question.
that
Your worship, no, this council and the community has obviously been, they're very good to the staff and development services. And the biggest thing for us is just trying to encourage individuals to utilize the resources that are available on the website. We have a short-term rental fact sheet that gets very specific as to a short-term rental is in a separate dwelling unit. Well, the next logical question is what constitutes a separate dwelling unit? Here's all the list of items or combination of items that could be viewed as a separate dwelling unit. And to be fully blunt with council and the community, this is the job. Unfortunately, it does just take time to go over the individual proposals with proponents to make sure that we are consistently applying the rules equitably across the board. And it is a more complicated discussion, unfortunately, at times than it ought to be, but that's the way zoning regulations and BC Building Code works.
Okay, thank you for all that.
Councilor Sturgeon.
I think the key word in that is equitable, and I think hearing the comments from the community, I think policy number 4 isn't equitable for members of our community. I think it continues the inequities based on your zoning and the location of where you live. I think, and I think the other part of all of this is if our current framework for short-term rentals was so adequate, why are we making changes? Should just be status quo, continue on it. as is. I think for those reasons, amongst others, and then lastly, the other reason I think overall is the lack of transparency around this. I don't feel that, going to the public over a 2-year process or whatever the process was, presenting 3 different options and then implementing a 4th option. I don't really think that's good governance, and I don't think it's transparent, and I think that is evident in the letters that we've received from the public. Thank you.
Any other comments on the motion on the table? Councillor Devlin, sorry.
Yeah, I just, through the chair, just like to address that. Just to the public, I guess, more than to Councillor Stapenhurst on this. There is always an option 4. I mean, if there's 3 options, no is always an option. A council can deliberate, it can vote, and all that option 4 is saying, essentially, with a couple of very minor tweaks, is staff does not recommend making changes. It could have been worded that way instead of being called option number 4. My assumption is that it was kind of worded this way because a couple small changes were made, and also because there is a specific perception if we go through a 2-year process and then staff says, actually, we don't think we should do this. It's a different perception than calling it option 4. Option 4 or an option to change nothing is always an option in any discretionary council decision. We can always vote no. We can always shoot down any motion that comes across the table. So I think this narrative amongst the public or small pieces of the public that have said that option 4 wasn't presented, option 4 is implicit in any council decision, or a no vote is implicit in any council decision, and that's always to be anticipated. Staff has done the work. They've come back with their recommendation from a staff perspective. We are, as a council, are deliberating it. I just think it's a dangerous narrative to say that option number 4 wasn't presented, because option number 4 is always implicit in any conversation we have.
Great, appreciate that comment. One thing that I've learned many times over when we go through these processes themselves lead us to the options that are presented to us. It's not a waste of time. It's not status quo. It's a learning experience. We come up with information on the other side. So all those who contributed, their comments, their concerns were heard by staff. And part of that is what we have in front of us today. Not part of it, all of it. It's what we have in front of us today. So staff have done their work. It's not about us sitting still. It's about saying at this time, staff don't recommend many changes because we don't have a lot of the sureties that we already have in place. So to change those sureties may be complicated things. So I really believe that what we have is the best of all worlds at this point, even though the public may think we haven't done a damn thing, when indeed we've done lots to get to where we are. So any other comments on the motion on the table? Councillor Palmer, then Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor Souls. I have a question for my comment. So with this motion being conveyed as a no change option, however, there is changes that are there. At a very, very high level, I know what's in the report, but at a very high level, the planner give clarity as to, that's a complication, a high level clarity of what those changes that would come with this motion on the table.
Mr. Simon, could you give clarity on that, please?
Through your worship, of course I can. So this would entail amendments to the business licensing bylaw as well as policy DS-23 to implement the 3-strike rule. So we would work to give clarity, some information sheets as to what that includes, as well as amendments necessary to our business licensing bylaw that would essentially say, once you've hit that 3rd strike, you've had a warning or a ticket issued, your license is up for discussion and it's coming to council for review. We would require advertising, and we would reach out to all STR operators pending adoption of any amending bylaws, B&B operators as well, to say your advertisements on whatever platform they may be, in order to be considered legal, must include the minimum number of parking spaces that matches your minimum number of parking spaces that was approved on your business license. We would clarify in council policy that at this time, it is the city's position to not opt in to the provincial principal residence requirement and outline the process that would be recommended to be undertaken should council ever in the future decide to reconsider that decision. And then amendments as well that would stipulate what requirements must be undertaken through council policy to update short-term rental regulations in the future. So you can see the idea is to try and give some certainty and to ensure that the decisions that are made today by this council, regardless of future councils coming in, future staff coming in, the community has more certainty as to how this topic would be discussed. And it would largely likely entail just minimum requirements for public engagement that must be undertaken.
Follow up, Council.
Yes, thanks, Mayor Souls. So for the motion on the table, yes, there's disappointment. There's, from my perspective, there's a disappointment. And a slightly different lens on the option 4. I know there was some dialogue saying, okay, well, there's always this option to status quo. It's not quite that. And the frustration that I hear on the street and in some of the letters we've received is that option with those reinforcing things was not part of that, this latest rendition of community consultation. That's not a criticism of the consultation. I think it was very well done, but that was not there. And I think that's some of the frustration. When we're with this option 4, one of the things, thinking back with the previous council, it was the course that the previous council was going, which you and I were part of, was this more incremental approach to areas. So to me, there's disappointment on the fringe areas that made more sense, that are supportive of the resort, and that was there. And it seems that we've forgotten that dialogue. That would be option 2, of course, that direction, not without its faults as well. So those are my sort of disappointments. Also, where we are today is predictable. I think we had some dialogue. I sort of remember talking about a year ago saying, well, we're going to bring this right up into an election year again, in the controversy, predictable controversy. And there's been some dialogue about, I think Councillor Cherry was bringing up basically the question about the B&B loophole kind of scenario. So we've talked about that, and I think there's been quite a bit of tightening actually, largely resolutions Councillor Cherry's brought in the past. So that's my disappointment. Looking ahead, I will support this motion. Not that I'm entirely happy, but it seems like the best option at this point. We'll see what happens in the fall. We'll see after these tweaks, see as more housing comes on the market, right, and those items. So that's kind of where I stand right now. I'd love to sort of go into more and more detail, but I think we've talked about that quite a bit in the past. So ultimately, with hesitation, I will be supporting the motion on the table.
Councilor Louisa.
Thanks, Mayor Souls. Yeah, just to echo what Councillor Palmer had said about the frustration in the community with the public engagement. They were very much encouraged to stay on the 3 options, and understand Councillor Devlin's point that we can always say no to anything that comes to the table, but the frustration in the community comes from the fact that we're trying to guide towards those 3 and not willing to have the conversation outside of those 3, and then having a option come forward that wasn't able to be commented on by the public at the time. Now I can see why they're upset with that. So that's my reservations on supporting option number 4.
Councilor Ryan.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Souls. Not sure where we're going on our vote here, but it's looking like people are leaning towards supporting this. So just wanted to take an opportunity to run down my thoughts. I will support the resolution as presented, option 4, which is the same as the staff recommendation. Is that correct? There's
Yes.
no tweaks to that. So, you know, the way I look at it is this really was the starting point of this was Bill 35, which was the provincial legislation that brought in a bunch of new mandatory rules and requirements, and then it had optional ones. So, you know, all in, I think there was a lot of good stuff in what they did, including requiring connecting to online platforms, making it a lot easier, providing, you know, having the jurisdiction to deal with a lot of these issues provincially, as opposed to every municipality trying to weigh into areas of taxation, which we don't really have authority to necessarily create our own rule, nor do we have the muscle to bring Airbnb or other major providers to the table here to our needs. So that was good. But the big problem, in my view, especially for resort municipalities, is this opt-in and opt-out of principal residence requirement, meaning you must live in the place. So what that does, and I think what the intention of that policy always was to look at like large condo buildings where it's not possible to rent like that, and that would exclude them from doing short-term rental. And I think that's, you know, at the edge of our conversation here. This sort of new framework, staff interpreted it, and, you know, as well as council in supporting their initial responses, in that we need to respond to this. We need to come up with something. This is out there. We need to figure out whether we're going to be in or out. I think the problem really with this opt-in or opt-out thing is that what the province has done is created without, you know, it's specifically designed not to have leeway on these things. The staff has described it to us as the floor. We cannot go below the floor. There's no workaround where we like allow it in some places or another. Nope. Where we do this and that. Like listening to them, it's pretty clear what the intent is. But in a town like resort towns, which were, you know, designated resort towns were left out, that creates a problem for us, because it becomes immediately a political issue and a recurring one, especially because you can opt in and then you can opt out. You opt in, you can opt out, you need over 3% residency. So I'm not happy with that one, because it puts a lot of pressure, and it also creates this binary choice. You got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do this, you got to do that. You can't have flexibility on that. In my view, I think there's, you know, options moving forward to address this particular issue, just because it will be, you know, continue to be contentious. So speaking to what's on the table today, you know, I know staff, I know council members, I know the mayor have listened to everyone's perspectives over the past couple of years. They've compiled all the information, they've put it in front of us. We had opportunities to read documents that are like 100-page longs with all the comments, with all kinds of stuff in there. And unfortunately, as has always been the case, you know, when we put the lens towards putting this out to the public in a designated council-supported process, that puts an onus on us to listen to people, and the response that they essentially have is, you know, 4, 5, 6 camps, all not really meeting in the middle on their viewpoint, and it becomes really difficult to say, oh yeah, well, this is clear, we ought to do this, we ought to do that, and then we end up in the same position here. You know, I know Mayor Souls and I were on council from 2014 to 2018, and we had the spot zoning thing, and that was a disaster. You know, we had 4-hour-long meetings full of people lined up out the door, you know, yelling at us and getting in their neighbor's business and everything. And so there's an example, I think, of something I don't want to do again. It's not that it's in here, but in something that we're doing here, where we suddenly ignite a new controversy. We create division in the community over these issues, and we you know, are the genesis of a lot of the feelings and bitterness that happened as a result and could happen in the future. I think you know, it's important to recognize that the current system affects everyone differently. You know, if you're a homeowner and, you know, want an opportunity to generate more income, you know, there are people who, you know, struggle for housing, and there are people who are concerned about affordability. There are existing operators who have entitlements under short-term rental operators who have entitlements under our current regime who, you know, probably would prefer that it stays the same. I think, you know, some of the practical improvements outlined here in the policy that will be further developed. So the recommendation is for staff to actually put pen to paper on those things can help. And the number one way, and I really want to emphasize this every time we're talking about this, I hope we have people are getting this message, is please read the report on what staff have achieved in the interim this term on enforcement of our existing rules. We are night and day well ahead of this. It was a mess. It was not, you know, we didn't have the data, we didn't have the numbers. It was, you know, all over the place. And this is due to historical, you know, changes of an environment, and they're really on top of it. Instead of trying to track down and deal with somebody who's just outside the law completely, you know, something you see on Airbnb and what's this, not zoned for that, don't license anything. What they're doing is now focusing on enforcement of existing licenses, like how many days you're allowed to do it, your parking, et cetera, and all that kind of stuff. And what they are asking for is additional tools such as the 3-strike rule and you get suspended for a year if you're not complying, which is something they have told us that they need. Another thing I want to commend this council on is improving at the start of our term our ticketing bylaw. Sorry, I don't want to get into the technical weeds of it, but we made a really big change that prevents people from just walking away from it or having to like literally serve the person who is responsible for this, winding up in court in the Okanagan or something for days where senior staff are all tied up with procedure. We're doing much better on that, and I think the council has made that change. And as a result of these multiple changes, and including adopting new technological systems, tracking systems, and hard work of staff, we are in a much better place and much better to control this. But I think although our current framework is not perfect, it is continuing to function more, and future councils can revisit this issue if circumstances change. I think that for now it's time to conclude this. I know it's not the happy thing that everybody wants to hear. It doesn't fit everyone's needs, and I get right at face value that, you know, spending 2 years and doing all these consultations, spending money on that, and then coming back and saying essentially, oh, they don't change anything, doesn't look good. You know, it looks like that was a misfire or something. But I think what it does is listen to what people say and realize that we don't, through the public participation process, we don't have a clear mandate based on what we've heard to do to take direction A, B, or C. So for that reason, at this point, I feel that that's why I'm going to support the resolution as presented by staff, and the one that is on the floor moving forward. And I'm looking forward to the policy changes that are suggested in there, and looking at the wording of those. So thank you, Mr.
Anyone else have any comment on the motion on the table? Seeing none, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor?
No.
Opposed? No. Councilor Luciano, Councilor Stapleton are opposed. Balance of councils in favor. This motion passes. I want to say thank you to the staff for the time on this and for council for deliberating. We have one other item. We have a short-term rental letter from Tourism Revelstoke. That was part of our engagement process, came to us. Any comments on that letter? Seeing none. Councilor Stapleton?
No, I was just gonna thank Tourism Revelstoke and Robin, who's been filling in as the temporary ED. I reached out to them over the course of the weekend. I wanted clarification based on the presentation that I saw at the AGM and then this letter. And so I really thank them for taking the time out, especially over the course of the weekend, and getting back to me so promptly. It was very informative. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Any other comments on the letter? None. We're at the end of the day. I'm going to call for termination. Somebody want to do that for me? Councilor Devlin.
I know.
Councilor Stapleton. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you all for your time. Appreciate it. Thank you, staff, CED staff, for being here. Appreciate that. And again, to our development planning staff, Mr. Gibbs, Mr. Simon, Mr. Black, Becca, who keeps counting all the shekels as we put things forward, go like, what's this gonna cost? Thank you all for your time. Appreciate it. Ms. Delaselle, Ms. Williams, thank you. We're done. Mr. Parliament, thank you.